She was mocked at a jiu-jitsu class, called too weak and old by the arrogant instructor. The black belt smirked as he challenged the 68-year-old woman to spar. Nobody expected what happened next. She submitted him in just 14 seconds. But this simple old woman had a secret that was about to change everything. Dorothy Miller stood in the parking lot of Elite Warriors Academy, her gray hair tied in a neat bun. At 68 years old, she looked like any grandmother you might see at the grocery store. Her plain t-shirt and worn sweatpants gave no hint of what she was capable of. She held a brown belt in her weathered hands. "Time to keep my promise, Henry," she said softly, looking at the sky. Her husband Henry had passed away 5 months ago. He had been her jiu-jitsu teacher for 42 years, training her secretly in their basement gym. Not many people knew that Dorothy held a black belt. She had earned it 28 years ago. 3 weeks before Henry died, he had gripped her hand tightly. Martial arts schools have lost their way. They mock older people, especially women. They think strength is everything. Promise me you'll show them what real jiu-jitsu means. Today was the day. Dorothy had heard terrible things about Elite Warriors Academy. The head instructor, Carlos Mendez, was famous for humiliating weaker students. Videos online showed him making fun of beginners until they quit. She had decided to go undercover as a new student to expose the truth. Walking through the front door, Dorothy saw a muscular young man at the desk. He looked up and down at her with barely hidden amusement. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, clearly thinking she was lost. "I'm here for the advanced jiu-jitsu class," Dorothy said calmly. The young man chuckled. "Are you sure? We have a gentle stretching class for seniors on Wednesdays." "I have a brown belt," Dorothy replied, showing him the belt. "I've been training for 35 years. His smile faded slightly. "Well, okay. But Master Mendez doesn't go easy on anyone. Don't say I didn't warn you." Dorothy signed the waiver using a fake name, Diane Carter. She wanted to remain unknown for this test. In the women's changing room, she met Amy, a purple belt who was secretly helping her. Amy had a small camera ready to record whatever happened. "Mendez is in a bad mood today," Amy whispered. "He already made 2 guys quit during the noon class. Please be careful." Dorothy changed into her GI, tied her brown belt, and entered the training area. 20 students, mostly young men in their 20s and 30s, were warming up. They all turned to stare at the old woman walking onto the mat. Carlos Mendez stood in the center, a powerfully built man in his late 30s. His black belt had 5 stripes, showing his high rank. When he saw Dorothy, his eyes lit up with cruel amusement. "Attention everyone," Mendez called out loudly. "It seems someone's grandmother got lost on her way to bingo night." Several students laughed. Dorothy remained calm, bowing respectfully as she stepped onto the mat. "I'm here for class, sir," she said simply. Mendez walked closer, towering over her. "Lady, this isn't a knitting circle. This is serious combat training. Maybe you should try the water aerobics class at the YMCA." "I've been training jiu-jitsu for 35 years, Dorothy said, meeting his eyes steadily. "Oh really?" Mendez's voice dripped with sarcasm. "And where exactly did you train? Your living room?" "My husband taught me," Dorothy answered truthfully. More laughter from the students. Mendez grinned wickedly. "Your husband? Was he a real black belt or did he just pretend to teach you?" "He was a legitimate black belt under Grandmaster Silva," Dorothy said, naming one of the most respected names in jiu-jitsu. Mendez's expression changed slightly. He knew that name. But his ego quickly took over again. "Well then, Grandma, let's see what your husband taught you. Class, gather around. We're going to have a special demonstration." The students formed a circle. Dorothy could feel their excitement. They expected to see her humiliated. "I'll go easy on you," Mendez said loudly, winking at his students. "We don't want to break a hip." They faced each other in the center. Mendez didn't even bother to bow. Dorothy maintained her respectful stance, waiting calmly. "Come on, attack me," Mendez goaded. "Show us your 35 years of living room training." Dorothy moved forward carefully, reaching for a collar grip. Mendez slapped her hand away roughly. "Too slow. Is that the best you can do?" He grabbed her GI and pulled her off balance, making her stumble. The students laughed as Dorothy caught herself. "This is pathetic," Mendez announced. "This is why we don't waste time with old people who think they know martial arts." He shot in for an aggressive takedown, intending to slam her to the mat hard. But Dorothy had been waiting for this moment. She had let him underestimate her completely. As Mendez committed to the takedown, Dorothy executed a perfect sprawl, a defensive technique her husband had drilled into her thousands of times. Mendez's face showed shock as his attack failed. Before he could recover, Dorothy transitioned smoothly. Her movements were fluid and precise, nothing like the stumbling old woman she had pretended to be moments before. In one swift motion she took Mendez's back. Her years of training took over. She secured her hooks, controlled his arms, and began working for a choke. Mendez struggled frantically, but Dorothy's technique was flawless. "What's happening?" a student whispered. "I don't believe this," another said. Mendez tried to shake her off, but Dorothy adjusted perfectly with each of his movements. She had the experience of 4 decades, the muscle memory of countless training sessions. Finally she secured the rear naked choke. Mendez's face turned red as he realized he was caught. His pride battled with the reality of the situation. The room was dead silent except for the sound of Mendez's labored breathing. 1 second. 3. Mendez tapped frantically on Dorothy's arm, the universal signal of submission in Jiu-Jitsu. 4, 5, 6. Dorothy maintained the choke for just a moment longer, making sure everyone saw clearly. 7, 9. Mendez's tapping became more desperate. 11, 12. Finally, at 14 seconds, Dorothy released the choke and stepped back. Mendez collapsed forward, gasping for air, his face a mixture of shock and humiliation. The gym was completely silent. 20 students stared in absolute disbelief at the elderly woman who had just submitted their seemingly invincible instructor in 14 seconds. Dorothy stood calmly, not even breathing hard. She adjusted her GI and bowed respectfully to Mendez, who was still on his hands and knees. "Thank you for the roll," she said politely, using the traditional phrase. Mendez looked up at her, his eyes wide with confusion and dawning respect. Who are you?" Dorothy reached into her GI and pulled out a photograph. She handed it to Mendez. It showed a younger Dorothy standing next to a distinguished-looking man in a black belt. "That's my husband Henry Miller," she said. "You might know him better as Professor Miller from the Miller Academy." Gasps went around the room. Everyone in serious jiu-jitsu circles knew that name. Henry Miller had been one of the first Americans to receive a black belt in Brazil in the 1960s. He was a legend who had chosen to teach privately rather than commercialize his knowledge. You're Professor Miller's wife?" Mendez stammered. "But that means—" "I'm actually a 3rd-degree black belt," Dorothy said simply. "I earned it 28 years ago. I chose to wear brown today for a reason." She looked around at all the students. "My husband spent his life teaching that jiu-jitsu is for everyone, young, old, strong, weak, men, women. It's about technique, not muscle. It's about respect, not humiliation." Dorothy turned back to Mendez. "Before he died, Henry asked me to help bring respect back to this art. He heard about places like this, where instructors mock students instead of teaching them, where older people and women are seen as jokes instead of potential warriors." She addressed the whole class now. "I came here today to test how you treat newcomers. What I found was exactly what my husband feared, a culture of bullying disguised as training." Mendez slowly got to his feet. His face had lost all arrogance, replaced by shame and something else, understanding. I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I never thought about it that way. Jiu-Jitsu saved my life when I was young," Dorothy continued. "It gave me confidence, strength, and purpose. Everyone deserves that chance, regardless of age or appearance." Amy stepped forward, revealing her camera. "I recorded everything. Not to destroy your school, but to show what needs to change." Mendez nodded slowly. "You're right. I've lost my way. I became the kind of instructor I used to hate." He turned to his students. "Class dismissed. I need to think about this." As students began to leave, many approached Dorothy with newfound respect. Several asked if she would teach them. "The real test," Dorothy said to Mendez, "is what you do next. Will you continue the old way, or will you honor what jiu-jitsu really means?" Mendez looked at the photo again, then at Dorothy. Would you help me? Teach me what Professor Miller taught you? Not just the techniques but the philosophy." Dorothy smiled for the first time since entering the gym. "That's why I'm here." 3 months later, Elite Warriors Academy had a new name, Miller Mendez Jiu-Jitsu. The walls displayed not just trophies but principles: respect, humility, persistence, and inclusion. Dorothy, now wearing her black belt, taught a special class for students over 50. The class was full, with people aged 50 to 75 learning that Jiu-Jitsu truly was for everyone. Mendez had become a different instructor. He still pushed students hard, but with encouragement instead of mockery. He made sure everyone felt welcome, regardless of age, gender, or ability. "Professor Dorothy," a 70-year-old student called out. "Can you show us that choke again?" As Dorothy demonstrated the technique, she caught sight of Henry's photo on the wall. She could almost hear his voice, "Good job. You kept your promise." The transformation wasn't just about one gym. Word spread quickly through the martial arts community. Other schools began examining their own cultures. Dorothy received invitations to teach seminars worldwide, spreading her husband's philosophy. One day, a young woman approached Dorothy after class. She was thin and nervous, clearly intimidated. I want to learn," the woman said, "but I've been to 3 schools and they all said I was too weak." Dorothy smiled warmly. "What's your name?" "Sarah." "Well, Sarah, let me tell you something. When I started training 42 years ago, everyone said the same thing about me. Too old, too weak, too female. But my husband saw something different. He saw potential." Dorothy handed Sarah a white belt. Strength comes in many forms. Physical strength is just one. Mental strength, emotional strength, the strength to keep trying when everyone says you can't, those matter more. As Sarah tied on her belt with shaking hands, Dorothy remembered her own first day. Henry had said the same words to her. Mendez approached them. "Sarah, welcome to our school. Professor Dorothy is our toughest instructor but also our best. You're in good hands." The young woman's face lit up. For the first time she felt welcomed in a martial arts school. Later that evening, Dorothy sat in the empty gym looking at all the changes. The aggressive posters had been replaced with inspirational quotes. The trophy case now included photos of students of all ages achieving their goals. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from another instructor who had seen the video. "Professor Dorothy, I want to change my school too. Can you help?" She smiled and typed back, "Of course. Real strength comes from lifting others up, not putting them down." As she turned off the lights, Dorothy whispered to the empty room, "We did it, Henry. One school at a time, we're bringing honor back to the art you loved." 6 months later, Dorothy received an unexpected package. Inside was a red coral belt, the highest honor in Jiu-Jitsu, given only to those who had profoundly impacted the art. The letter was signed by Grand Master Silva himself. "Dear Professor Dorothy, your husband would be proud. You have reminded us all what Jiu-Jitsu truly means. This belt recognizes not your fighting skill, but your spirit and dedication to preserving the soul of our art." Dorothy held the belt with trembling hands. At 68 years old, she had achieved something most people never would. Not through strength or youth, but through wisdom, patience, and staying true to her principles. The story of the old woman who submitted a black belt in 14 seconds became legend. But the real story, the story of transformation and respect, became Dorothy's true legacy. Every new student who walked into Miller Mendez Jiu-Jitsu saw the sign by the door, "Leave your ego outside. Bring your heart inside. Everyone is welcome here." And in the place of honor on the wall, 2 photos hung side by side, Henry Miller and Dorothy Miller, guardians of what Jiu-Jitsu should be, an art that empowers everyone regardless of age or appearance. Dorothy continued teaching until she was 75, inspiring thousands of students who might have given up otherwise. She proved that real power comes not from youth or muscle, but from knowledge, experience, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The 14-second submission was just the beginning. The real victory was measured in changed hearts and open minds, in every student who found strength they didn't know they had, and in every instructor who learned that teaching means building up, not tearing down. As Dorothy often said in her classes, Jiu-Jitsu isn't about being the strongest person in the room. It's about becoming the strongest version of yourself. And that lesson, more than any technique, was her greatest gift to the martial arts world.